From the Windows, Doors, and More Studios, your one-stop shop for all your kitchen and bath needs. The Pat Miller Program. Whoa, 92.3 FM and 1190 AM. Depend on it.
And welcome. I hope that this Saturday finds you doing very well. I'm very grateful that you're spending part of it now listening to the Pat Miller Program as we bring you this program now every Saturday from noon to 3. So thank you for being with us. Remember, if you want to text me, you can do it while we're here on the air at 46862. That's 46862. Text the word WOWO first, your question or comment. Comes right here, or you can email me, Pat Miller, all one word, no dots or dashes, Pat Miller at WOWO.com. Well, a message to all of the students in and around our country who seem to be taking over our college campuses, wreaking havoc and doing whatever it is they feel like they want to do. This is from who else? The Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Yeah, that's right. The Supreme Leader in Iran is sending a notice, a message to our students here. And here's what the premier leader there in Iran says. Dear university students in the United States of America, you are standing on the right side of history. You have now formed a branch of the resistance front and have begun an honorable struggle in the face of your government's ruthless pressure, which openly supports Zionists. Okay, first of all, were that the case, I don't know that it is, but were that the case, I don't know that we need the approval of the Ayatollah Khamenei from Iran telling us. As House Speaker Mike Johnson said, House Speaker Johnson said when this statement came out from the Ayatollah, he said, when you've won the Ayatollah, you've lost America. People of brains, okay, you people on these Ivy League campuses and large college campuses across the country, universities that used to mean something should still mean something. We want them to desperately mean something, but you're almost making it impossible for us to view it that way. But if you want to, do you understand what it is that Speaker Johnson is saying? If you've won over the Ayatollah Khamenei, the ruthless dictator of the ruthless insurrection that is known as the nation of Iran, the greatest instigator right now of terrorism around the world, if he's on your side, you might want to recheck your sides. You might want to check and see if maybe you've missed something. Joe Biden, current president of the United States, thought I would remind you of that because sometimes he doesn't quite sound like a president, but he is our president. He says this: Trump is the same guy who wanted to tear gas you as you peacefully protested George Floyd's murder. The same guy who still calls the Central Park Five guilty, even though they were exonerated. He's that landlord who denies housing applications because of the color of your skin. Great words, President Joe. Since you're speaking to a group of black voters in a rally that you held this week, I'm sure you got a lot of hoops and hollers and yeah, man, and all that. What evidence did you have of any of that? Of any of it? If you're reaching back and your big claim to fame is the fact that you stood with George Floyd, good luck. Look, I have talked to a lot of black leaders, good black leaders, some of them Democrats, some of them not fans of the Pat Miller Program, and they will tell you that the whole George Floyd thing was a mess, an absolute mess. But if Joe wants to go back and grab it, well, then that's what you need to do. Look, we've got this debate coming up, okay, this first debate. And when it happens, and this is why I think that we can't underestimate Joe Biden. Think of Biden and Trump's upcoming debate as a boxing match between an Olympic heavyweight and a 12-year-old child with a limp. We all expect the Olympic heavyweight to beat the 12-year-old child with a limp and beat him to a pulp. But we also know that the Olympic heavyweight will then be judged for cruelly beating a 12-year-old child with a limp to a pulp. In a strange twist of fate, Much like Biden's history of grief, he's managed to turn his obvious mental fragility into a shield. Well, Trump's just picking on him because the president, is challenged, with some of his cognitive abilities. Well, shouldn't that be some kind of a sign to you? If Joe Biden had come out at the start of the 2020 election and said, "I really want to be your president. I think I was a great president with President Barack Obama. Now, let me be honest with you. I've got some cognitive disabilities." We would have all stopped and gone, "What? You've got what?" But see, it's now like almost the Democrats on their side are not trying to deny that cognitive shortcomings perceived there on the part of Joe Biden. But you cannot underestimate him because he's going to pull that shield over and protect himself and say, "Woe is me," and that dirty, filthy Donald Trump is beating up on me. Won't you please come and won't you please try to help me? Now I want you to hear what his wife Jill has said. She said, "Can you imagine if we put any more Republicans on the Supreme Court? We will lose all of our rights." The only rights I see us losing, the only rights that have been in jeopardy, Mrs. Biden, in recent history, and you've got to understand the difference between rights and just things that you want or need or that you're being challenged on. A right is a right. Democrats are the only ones stripping God-given rights by making up non-existent ones. And they're claiming it, and she's trying to say, "Oh, this is awful." I want you to think this through. You remember the Ronald Reagan line that he came out with as he was fighting then against Jimmy Carter back in 1980? Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? In other words, cut through all the rhetoric, cut through all the garbage. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And the country collectively said no. Jill Biden said, "We are in a better place now. Joe has done amazing things for this country, and we have to get the message out." Well, you better hurry because I can't think of any amazing things that he has done for the country. Can you? I mean, can you folks? Amazing things that Joe Biden has done for the country? I can't think of any. Well, obviously he thinks they've got some. My husband, Jill went on to say, "My husband is calm and steady and strong and has character and integrity." Now, also running in that same lane, because I think she wants to be known as Jill Biden Light, but Karine Jean-Pierre, who of course is the press secretary at the White House, she said, "We are also lowering the price of gas, including by selling 1 million barrels of gasoline from the Northeast Gasoline Supply Reserve." Didn't we just do that? Now, when they sold it before, they did it out of the Emergency Petroleum Reserve, but it's the same thing. Okay, what are the people going to do in the Northeast if they don't have what they're supposed to have? What are they going to do? It's an amazing thing to me that that's where we are. Absolutely an amazing thing that that's where we are. Jared Bernstein, Council of Economic Advisors chairman, says we're doing all we can to lower costs. Well, if that were true, the government would stop spending money they don't have, because that's how you lower costs. Just stop spending the money. Just stop it. Corinne wasn't done, by the way, after her claim on fuel. The president has taken some actions over the last 3 years to deal with what we're seeing at the border. First of all, what are we seeing at the border? You guys kept telling us that the border was fine. There was no problem at the border. Now, are you admitting there's a problem at the border, but that everything that he's doing down there to fix it is fine? We'll talk more about that when we come back straight ahead. Thanks for being with us on this Saturday. This is Pat Miller here on WOWO 92.3 FM and 1190 AM.
This is the Pat Miller Program on WOWO 92.3 FM and 1190 AM and on the WOWO app.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Glad you're with us. It's Saturday, as you probably figured out by now. You know, if you get to a little bit after noon and you're not aware yet that it is in fact Saturday, you probably had too busy a Friday night. Okay, so just saying. Which for me would mean an overabundance of cherry Coke. But coming up in the rest of the program, at the start of the next hour, Philip Wegman from Real Clear Politics, Tommy Carden from an incredible organization that we talked with her about a couple times last month, the Redemption House here in Fort Wayne. They had their banquet, and we're going to get the report on all that's going on with that great group. And then coming up in the third hour, 3rd District Congressman, now the Republican candidate for the Senate from the state of Indiana, Jim Banks. They'll all be with us coming up starting after 1 o'clock. Well, let me take a moment here and talk about a few things that I find interesting. Let's go back to some people other than politicians per se, and other people's recollections and takes on the election or elections past. For example, looking back a few years, the co-host Sunny Hostin, who you can just about fill a thimble several times over with her political and intellectual acuity, she said this: "What was interesting to me with Hillary Clinton is that she pointed to the sexism that was so obvious because she was the most qualified presidential candidate that I think we've ever had." Well, again, and that's not all that Hostin had to say, more in a minute, but what struck me by this quote, when was Hillary aware of that? Leading up to the election, the day of the election, or the night of the election when she realized that, in fact, she had lost? If she is this incredible, brilliant individual, how could she not see it coming? While she was out there taking statements like we were all a basket of deplorables, did she not see how that was going to come back to bite her somehow? Obviously not. But there you've got it. So you've got this basket of deplorables and their candidate for the other side, Hillary, and it's so obvious, according to Sunny Hostin, that she was the most qualified candidate. Here's one of the problems. In New York City, probably so. See, Sunny Hostin is just like the others on The View and many other stars and famous people. They are so locked into the Big Apple, they can't see beyond it. They think if you cross the bridge to go over into New Jersey, or if you go up into northern New York, that you lose sight of what's real. What people in New York City and what Sunny Hostin and her friends on The View think, that's real. This is why we can never lose the grasp on the Electoral College. Once you go to a purely popular vote, they will drown us, and we can't have it. I don't care how many millions of people they cram into New York City. I don't want them to decide what life looks like here in Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. It needs to be different. But to carry on, when Sunny Hostin was talking about how she was the greatest candidate that we've ever had, not the greatest candidate we had in that election, the greatest candidate we've ever had. She said, we're talking senator, we're talking secretary of state, we're talking lawyer, valedictorian of her class. I mean, just a brilliant woman. Well, Hillary might be a very smart individual. Again, she was not so obviously brilliant that when she looked at the numbers and had her ear to the ground to hear what was coming on Election Day, why was she up in her room that night, election night, bawling her eyes out? Now, don't get me wrong. If I worked as hard for an election as Hillary did and I lost, I'd probably be upset too. But Hillary, could you not see it coming? And Sunny, how brilliant, how incredible. What a brilliant senator and valedictorian, just a brilliant woman. To call us, those of us out here, part of the stragglers, to call us like lower than lifes, we were the basket of deplorables, and then to be stunned that there were so many deplorables out here that we buried her. Not to be outdone, another brilliant man, a brilliant political mind, Robert De Niro, Again, he lives by the Barbra Streisand complex. I've often said Barbra Streisand, beautiful songstress. I used to be able to sit and listen to Barbra Streisand songs ad infinitum. Incredible. But when she thinks that because of what she does with what other people wrote, that gives her the automatic power to say, here's what I think ought to happen. And when it doesn't happen, she can't stand it. Well, you're doing it to the point, Barbara, that it's getting to the point that we can't stand even listening to you sing anymore because it is so deplorable. Robert De Niro said, under Trump, this kind of government will perish from the earth. If Trump returns to the White House, you can kiss these freedoms goodbye that we all take for granted. At elections, forget about it. That's over. That's done. If he gets in, I can tell you right now, he will never leave. He will never leave. You know that. He will never leave. Okay, based on what? Based on what? He said Trump wants to destroy not only the city, New York, but the country. And eventually, he could destroy the world. Why? Because when he was president, he held guys like the leader of North Korea in check, President Xi Jinping of China didn't feel the ability to come out and overly rattle his sabers over the Asians that are the islands out there near China. He held Putin at bay because Putin, although he hated Trump, dared not test Trump, because one thing that Putin knows is on their best day. Now, can they do us harm? Absolutely. But on their best day, they don't have the aircraft or the manpower. They don't have anything that they need to come out against us and to cause us harm and to destroy us and to wipe us off the map. Can't do it. Just cannot do it. Look, almost all the negative claims that Democrats have made in opposing the Trump's tax cuts, for example, back in 2017, have proven over and over and over that they were fallacious. They had nothing to stand on. Rather than admit that they were wrong, they've doubled down in their commitment to policies that would raise taxes on virtually every American corporation, every American small business, every American family, and every American investor. Now, do you fall in one of those categories? Do you work for a corporation? Do you work for a GM? Or do you work for an Amazon or one of the large banks? Do you work for a small business in the area? Somebody here in Northeast Indiana that they're a great company, but they've got, 150 or fewer employees? Are you part of a family? Are you an investor? Either you've got an extra 10 or 20,000 or maybe even more that you've placed into the market and you try to work it and play it so it will do you absolutely the most good when it comes time for you to retire, or it's in your 401k. But at the end of the day, they don't care because they've told us that's who they're coming after. American corporations, small businesses, families, and investors. Look, having a family is important. Having a family is going to provide more meaning and purpose, in fact, more than a job ever could. Your promotion can't hold your hand. You can hug your money, but it's not going to hug you back. Children provide parents with a living legacy and hopefully grandkids. Consider the irony. The left despises capitalism, the greatest wealth creation engine in human history, and urges women to find meaning in life by climbing the corporate ladder, not lowering themselves by just getting married. They're against everything we stand for. More coming up after the bottom of the hour. Hey, welcome back after the bottom of the hour. Very glad that you're with us. Hope you're having a great day, enjoying your family, even if some people on the other side are trying to tell you that's not important. But enjoy your family today. Have a great time with them. And thank you for sharing part of us with them and with you. There are sometimes statements come out of D.C. or any other echelon of politics. You don't have to be all the way in Washington, D.C. in a high-ranking office in the White House to be stupid. You could be stupid all the way down to dog catcher in whatever county you want to name. But in the midst of all this, sometimes statements come out that are just so asinine. John Kirby, you hear John Kirby every now and then as he speaks there from the podium in the White House press room. Here's something that came out this week. The president doesn't make decisions and he doesn't execute on policy based on public opinion or on popularity contests. He bases his decisions on our own national security interests. Really? Is that why we're going to go back into the gasoline reserves? We're not going to go into the national petroleum reserves because everybody saw us do that twice. But now he's going to go into the Northeast gasoline reserves and take it away from there. Well, if you take it away from there, what happens if they run low? They've got to go to the petroleum reserves. So you're going to take what's already been depleted and you're going to deplete it some more. But he says, this isn't because of public opinion. Can I ask you a question? What do you think he's doing with that money from the Northeast gasoline reserves? Does it bother you when Pat Miller can come on the air and go, okay, the gas that was at $2.70 when Biden took office is again up to around $3.60, $3.70, $3.79 in some areas here, out in the West even higher? Where do you think this money is going to go, these millions that he's pulling from this reserve? I wonder if they're going to cause gas prices to come down. Oh, I don't know, 25, 35 days before the election, because that's what I think is going to happen. That's absolutely what I think is going to happen. I don't know. I'm amazed at the people that keep wanting to pull the wool over our eyes, and when we pull it down and say, no, we see you, they'll go, nah, you just thought you did, and then they'll pull it back over again. Folks, just how stupid are we? And just how stupid do we think we can continue to be? We can't be this dumb. We just can't. Listen, here's some signs of losing an election, and get ready, because this is what the president and his friends are going to be up against. Number one, poll denial. What happened when somebody's asked the president in the last 30 days about one or two of the polls? I don't believe those polls. Those are a lie. Why? Because they didn't pick you out on top? Now, instead of Trump being ahead 7 points in Michigan, for example, and Biden goes, well, that's not a real poll. If it had showed Biden ahead by 7 points, and they said, Mr. President, are you aware that the polls show you ahead by 7 in Michigan? His answer would have been, well, yeah. Right? Look, part of the problems going on here is, and I've noticed this, that pollsters keep regularly asking voters whether a conviction would change their opinion about voting for Trump. Going back and polling on this crazy case that they've brought against Trump, which they didn't really bring. They just say it's there and it's not. But they have rarely asked whether an acquittal, what if Trump is found not guilty? Would that change their opinion about voting for Donald Trump? Why don't they ask that one? How come that one never seems to come up? Just a question. Then you've got the mental acuity of the president, which is nothing to make fun of, and I'm not. But I'm sitting here looking at this relative to what it is that the president suffers from. And if he's suffering from it, listen, you can't divide these two. If a president has a horrible moral failure in his life, not just once or twice, but it's the way he lives, should that come into question when you vote for him? Yeah, because it becomes a moral failure of the country. What about a failure of a mental collapse? With the president's obvious and his ongoing mental collapse, the problem is that our expectations have also collapsed. The brutal fact is that we expect so little from Joe Biden these days, it's almost impossible for him to disappoint. I mean, just think about what I just said. Sometimes we expect so little out of him Do you come away now from a press conference or a statement or a speech that he gives, do you come away from it going, well, it wasn't really all that bad? I need a president that's more than just, well, it's really not all that bad. I need more than that. We'll talk about more when we come up against it here as we move forward in the Pat Miller program. So very glad that you're with us here on the Pat Miller program. We're with you every Saturday from noon to 3 right here on WOWO 92.3 FM, 1190 AM.
This is the Pat Miller program on WOWO 92.3 FM and 1190 AM and at WOWO.com.
Hey, welcome back. Our last little segment here in the first hour of the Pat Miller program. Glad you guys are with us. Remember, you can text me at 46862. That's 46862. You text the word WOWO first, then your question or comment, and it comes right here. Or you can email me, Pat Miller, all one word, no dots or dashes, patmiller@wowo.com. After this segment, we've got Fox News at the top of the hour, and just after that, our weekly visit with Philip Wegman from Real Clear Politics. He is, of course, a Northeast Indiana boy growing up in Allen County, and then went to Hillsdale College and now works in Washington, D.C., but never forgets where he came from. That's why I like him so very, very much. Philip Wegman is my wife's favorite portion of the Pat Miller program. And you're saying, don't you mean that he's like second to you? I know what I'm saying. He's her favorite portion of the Pat Miller program. Philip Wegman with us right at 1 o'clock after the news. Let me go through some things I wanted to share here, some political insets as we're clearing out the balance of what we've said so far this hour. Let me go to Star Parker, and I've talked about Star Parker before. Star Parker is a very gorgeous young African-American woman who has been on the forefront for a few decades, standing in the gap, not as a black woman standing in the gap with conservatism, but just standing with conservatism, and she happens to be black. And she's aware of that, but it's not the first thing that she throws out there. Here's what she said. Biden, a politician all his adult life, is defined by just that, politics. No word, no act emanates from our president that does not emerge from some political calculation. It's the very thing that they accuse a lot on the right. And don't get me wrong, there are some people on the right that are very calculated, and they throw their politics up in the midst of everything that they say and do. But for Joe Biden to sit back and talk about how, well, Trump is just motivated by politics, and for Jill Biden, as I talked about earlier in the hour, well, Joe is not drawn out by politics. Every statement he's ever made has been based on politics. Do you remember why back in 1988, when Joe Biden was running for president, why he pulled out of the race? Do you remember why? Because of plagiarism. It was found that a lot of what he said, most of his most important speeches that he was given, were actually items that he lifted directly from speeches of people here in our country, people in England, and people in France. He wasn't even writing his own stuff. In fact, he didn't even hire speechwriters to write his own stuff. See, look, not every candidate can write every word that's going to come out of their mouth, because sometimes you want somebody that in certain areas, like if you're talking about oil and gas and power, you'd like to have somebody helping put together the words that's an expert in that area, so you don't take your foot and shove it directly in your mouth. But Joe wasn't even doing that. He wasn't getting help. He was lifting entire segments of speeches, some of them 2 and 3 pages worth. In today's age, do we not think that somebody's going to copy and paste something in a Google search engine and find out exactly where your words came from? It's rather easy to do, and it's not really smart for where they're at. Star Parker says, no word, no act emanates from this president that does not emerge from some political calculation. 3 signs of losing a campaign. Number 1 is poll denial. Number 2 is an inability to shift course. And number 3 are celebrity cameos. That's where you get your Barbra Streisands. That's where you get your Robert De Niro's. Look, Robert De Niro was a pretty decent actor. Barbra Streisand, a great musician. But that doesn't mean, do you really want De Niro to be the guy that you'd bring in the White House to talk to about whether or not you should invade that country or what our stand should be against Iran? Or do you think you ought to be doing that based on political minds that are around you that are brilliant? So I keep you keep doing it because it's easy. You get some star of stage, screen, and television, and you wad them up and you throw them out there and they go, oh, yeah, I think Joe's a great guy. It's dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. Now, a couple other thoughts about these people and their ability to pick out. Let's go with Ilhan Omar, who is not a star. She has made her fame as being part of the squad there on Capitol Hill. And here's what Gary Bauer said about her. I'm sure Ilhan Omar could give you a detailed history of every Islamic holiday on the calendar. It's the American holidays that so many leftists are ignorant about. Going back to what we just celebrated together, going back to Memorial Day. And look, and all this is not a problem just with the people that are there on the left. Sometimes on the right, we're not very good either. I had people skewer me last week. Well, you sure did an awful lot talking there about Memorial Day and all that. And my dad served with so many years, and now he's home, and I kept waiting for you to hear and talk about what he did in the Gulf War and all that. I would have talked about him last weekend if his service in the Gulf War had ended with him dying in uniform. That's Memorial Day. That's Memorial Day. In memory of someone. Look, your dad's day is coming up on Veterans Day in November. And we'll take a great deal of time on this program to recognize your dad and everybody else that served in our country. But that's Veterans Day. But sometimes with people like Ilhan Omar, they get so sideways, they don't know what holiday it is that we're talking about. They don't know how it is that we're supposed to remember them or what it is that we're supposed to remember them for. They don't remember any of it. They can't make any correlation to any of it at all. And that's pretty sad. Going back to the trial, Byron York, who I love Byron York, he said, if charges are so Byzantine that it is hard to convince reasonable people that a crime even occurred, then maybe Manhattan prosecutors should not have charged Trump with 34 felony counts that could result in a maximum of 136 years in prison over what is basically a bookkeeping matter. But such is the state of our justice system today. Look, just remember something, folks. The only reason for this stupid case, the only reason it was brought up in the first place, and I stand by this, is because of Joe Biden. And you say, well, Joe Biden isn't the reason for the case. He had nothing to do with it. No, it's being brought up because Joe Biden is a weak, dishonest, and failed president who can't run on his own record. And so to balance that, what's he going to do? Well, Joe Biden and his administration are going to blast and tear away at everything that's going on in the world today. And for them, that's Donald Trump, because he is the one that is most ready to be the one to cause them problems. As this trial's concluding, Donald Trump's trial is concluding, and Joseph LeBeau, and I read his stuff. He's a retired Navy officer. He's an attorney, and he's got a few thoughts. He said there's a good deal of crooked record keeping going on these days, but Democrats are the ones doing it. His words, not mine. Here we go. President Trump is on trial in New York for allegedly falsifying business records because the bookkeepers in his organization recorded certain legal expenses, specifically a legal settlement, as legal expenditures. Well, according to Democrat prosecutors, the bookkeepers should have recorded these payments as campaign contributions and expenditures because they say the payments were intended to influence the 2016 election unlawfully. And they intended to do it by concealing a purported sexual encounter with a pornographer. Now, this is not to say that the sexual encounter did or did not happen. That's not what this is saying. Okay? This is saying that even if something like that did happen, to put it in as something else is wrong. Convoluted and bizarre enough for you yet? I mean, everything they're going through? Well, it should be. Because there is absolutely nothing unlawful about concealing a purported sexual encounter with a pornographer. In fact, going back to Joseph LeBeau, he said federal campaign finance law actually prohibits candidates from characterizing the payments at issue in the Trump case as campaign contributions and expenditures. It prohibits it. Brad Smith, a leading expert on campaign finance law and former member of the Federal Election Commission, was set to testify to that very thing in open court in the Trump case. Set to testify. Except Juan Merchan, the partisan Democrat Biden donor judge presiding over the case, barred him from doing so. He barred him from even giving testimony. To accept the prosecution's case, you've got to conclude that New York law requires candidates to make business records that violate federal law. That's what they're saying he should have done. The Supremacy Clause of the Constitution does not allow that. So do you want to follow what they say in the Democrat Party, or do you want to follow one of the main clauses of the Constitution? And so it is. Democrat prosecutors, not the Trump organization, that conspired to falsely characterize the record-keeping issues in this case. It was not the Republicans. It was not the Trump administration. It was, in fact, the Democrats in this case. From inside the Beltway, Real Clear Politics, and their responder there at the White House, Philip Wegman. He's with us right after the news at the top of the hour.
Podcasts by Federated Media.